Hey there everyone, Cutlery Novice here, and I'm coming to you with another episode of my inexpensive knife series, this time on a Jinjunlang knife. I know, probably a brand many of you have not heard of, but essentially this is a copy of the, what do they call it, the Quartermaster, the General Quartermaster, which is a fairly expensive knife with the same opening mechanism. You may also recognize the opening mechanism from the Kershaw ET, I believe it was called, which, you know, cool knife in and of itself. This is not a copy of that design. There is an SR Columbia knife which directly copies that. This one is trying to imitate that Quartermaster. Alright, and if you don't have time to stick around for the whole review, I'll just go ahead and let you guys know. If you want this knife as a user, look elsewhere. It's not a user blade. If you want it as a fun, you know, fondling knife or flick it open and close in front of the TV type knife, maybe. Just know that there are still several issues with it in that department as well. So before I get into the knife itself, I'm gonna go ahead and show you the packaging. Pretty simple stuff. Jinjunlang knives, tools, some Chinese characters there. Says the same thing pretty much on every corner of the box. No barcode. But when we open this up, there is actually an included tool, which is very handy. If I can get this flimsy cardboard box open, and it is fairly flimsy. It does come with a Torx wrench with a T6 on this end and a T8 on this end to adjust the knife as we need to, which is very useful because you will need to adjust this knife quite a lot. I'll get into that in a bit. Nice included tool. It did not bend out of place whenever I was using it because I did use it itself to adjust the knife. So it seems to be made out of decent metal. The knife also came with a really flimsy nylon sheath. I currently am just using it to house my wife's Remington lockback knife. But just a really basic, flimsy, cheap nylon sheath, Velcro closure, and by the way, it came detaching right out of the box. So I'll have to super glue that down. Doesn't really matter. You're not going to carry the knife in the sheath anyways. It is a single belt loop that is kind of flimsily stitched on there. If I really pulled on that, it would come right off. But hey, has a clip, so we're not going to use the sheath anyways. Just figured I'd show it off to you. Okay, so here's the knife. Bit of a weird opening mechanism on this one. You may notice that we do have thumb studs, and you can open it that way if you're careful. Whenever I get to talking about deployment, I'll speak to why you shouldn't do that. And it also has this sarcastic quotation mark flipper on here, but it's meant to be opened using the unique mechanism. I don't know what it's called. I'll probably refer to this down here as the boot throughout the video because it kind of reminds me of a heel or a boot. Okay, especially on the Kershaw ET variants like SR Columbia makes, but in this case more of a high heel, I guess. But let's start with that blade like I always like to. We have a 3.4 inch long Tanto blade. It is hollow ground, has a pretty attractive looking fuller, and this knife did come super sharp out of the box. So sharp, in fact, that whenever I was messing around with it and flipping it open and closed, and I didn't realize how far back to place my finger on that mechanism, I actually sliced my thumb open, and it's mostly healed up now, but it was a fairly deep cut. I'm probably not going to focus in on that. Anyhow, be very careful because this knife does come surgically sharp out of box, which is pretty much to be expected from the type of steel we have here. Alright, this is a 3CR13. Sometimes very incorrectly listed as 3CR13 MOV. There is no such thing as 3CR13 MOV. Alright, there's no vanadium, there's no molybdenum in the 3CR steels. This is basically a Chinese version of 420J2. Now, I talk all the time about how the blade steel in your knives isn't as important as you think it might be, and that steels like 7CR17 MOV, 440A, AUS6, and various other affordable steels are probably more than enough for your EDC rolls. Is the same true for 420J2, or in this case 3CR13? I mean, how often do you use your knife? And I bring that up because this will not hold an edge, and it did not hold an edge in my, on my own personal testing. I did cut quite a bit of cardboard with this, as you can probably see by the wear on the blade. And after every single session, and sometimes during cardboard cutting sessions, I had to sharpen it up because it was completely dull. If your EDC is occasionally opening up a package that comes in the mail, popping a string off of your shirt, opening a clamshell package, maybe it's fine. But if you do any actual consistent cutting in your EDC, no, the 3CR13 isn't adequate. Not even for, you know, light duty EDC. Okay, if your EDC is anything other than practically non-existent, you probably want a better steel, unless you don't mind sharpening it up all the time. And that being said, it does sharpen extremely easily and takes a very, very sharp edge. It just won't hold it. Rust resistance is extremely high. Okay, anyone who's used 420J2 and variants of it know that it just does not rust. So that it is an upside, but if you want to use this, you know, actually carry and use this, you will have to sharpen it up quite frequently. Moving on to deployment and lockup, that's, well, when using the little boot down here, as I'm going to call it, it opens fast. The problem is, while the blade itself may open up relatively quickly, you have to reposition your hand, open the knife, and you can see that it didn't even fully open there. Getting some misfires, come on now. There we go. Open the knife, and then reposition your hand to use it. Same thing when you close it. Okay, so you have to pull that out of your pocket, flip it open, and then reposition to cut. So it's a bit slow in that department. In terms of lockup, up and down, it's a tank. Side to side, can you see that? Tons of slop. And the reason why is, in order to get this to actually flip open and closed, I had to leave a lot of slop in it. Because if I tighten down that pivot screw too much, which by the way is a somewhat cheap metal, as you can see it's been somewhat damaged by those adjustments, and it's actually coming loose again just from flicking this open and closed on video. But in order to get this to come open and shut and actually deploy using the designated mechanism, I had to get that pivot somewhat loose. I did Loctite it on this side, I did not Loctite it on this side. Perhaps I'll have to, since that's actually backing out as we speak every time I open the knife. So yeah, to deploy this knife, I needed a lot of slop, which I'm not a fan of. Granted, this is more of a novelty knife, but I have to review everything as if you're going to carry and use it, and I feel like lockup is inadequate for that in this particular blade. Alright, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, it does slice really effectively. That nice hollow grind on there. Even though this is a Tanto blade, which is not the most effective slicer, that blade does cut cardboard extremely well. Again, just needs to be resharpened. It's an effective slicing knife, just not a fast deploying or solid lockup knife. Another issue I was having is, you may notice this screw here is marred to hell. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Okay, it's been marred up pretty bad because I had to constantly crank that down to the point that I was almost stripping it, because every time I would try to close the knife, okay, you can see how that screw has to go inside the handle. It was always protruding and catching on the handle, preventing the ability to flick it closed. Alright, so that is another issue in terms of fit and finish, which this knife does not have a lot of. I did mention that we do have other deployment options, namely the thumb stud and the quote flipper. That flipper is never going to do anything. The springs in here are so strong, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to use that flipper. Can you use the thumb stud? Yes, you can. There is a problem with it, though. Okay, notice the construction of this handle mechanism and how we have a gap here. Whenever we open the knife, that gap expands. And the fat of our hand is going to be right there as we're opening this knife. So as we're opening everything up, and be careful not to cut yourself on that, as we're opening everything up, more and more of the fat of our hand will sink right into that opening, or that open part of the mechanism. And unlike when it's closed, where we still have a bit of a gap, when the knife is fully open, it's flush. It's actually completely shut. And so it will pinch your hand and the fat of your palm if you use the thumb studs to deploy this knife. And I did experience that whenever I attempted to use the studs, because I thought it would be more convenient. Every time I did, I would end up pinching myself on that handle, okay? So, yes, you technically have thumb stud options, but you'll never use them. In terms of ergonomics, the knife is uncomfortable. I mean, what do you expect? We have an awkward handle design. We have somewhat sharp metal edges. Not super sharp, like I couldn't strike a flint against it or something. Or a steel, rather. But it's just not a comfortable knife in hand. If you're really bearing down on this, it gets even worse. Tons of hot spots. It's not meant as a user knife. Okay, but I still have to talk about it as if it were, because the average person buying a knife wants to use it, not just play with it. Not a very ergonomic knife. Not a super light knife either, 5.1 ounces. Not super heavy though. Honestly, the weight is very doable for me for a knife this size with a blade this big. Handle, by the way, I didn't mention, is 4.9 inches long and made out of stainless steel. I believe specifically made out of 2CR13 stainless steel. Don't know what else to really talk about on this knife. I guess I could show you the pocket clip, which is a right-hand tip-up carry only. No, you cannot swab that, because you can see we have 2 screws mounting the clip. If it'll focus, you will. We have 2 screws mounting the clip. If you look underneath here, there are no holes tapped on the other side, so it will be a right-hand tip-up carry only, and it is a super deep pocket clip. Okay? So I'll go ahead and show you guys how this carries. And you can see that it does disappear in your pocket. So, you know, at least it's got a decent clip. I don't personally like the deep carry clips, but I know that most people out there do. By the way, I don't know if I showed this off, but there are Teflon washers for the pivot, and then for the various points in the mechanism, they actually use phosphor bronze washers, which I find a little funny. They don't bother using it on the pivot point, but they use it pretty much everywhere else. But hey, maybe they have their reasons. Alright, moving on to the safety of this knife. Be careful when opening and closing it. You can see how much space you have to hold on to when you open and close this knife. If you exceed that too far, when the blade comes back down, it can slice into your thumb, which is exactly what it did to mine. So be very careful when actuating the mechanism. Centering, by the way, is perfect. So that is, I guess, an upside. But honestly, with all the downsides weighing this knife down, and you can see I'm getting those misfires. Come on. There we go. With all the downsides weighing this thing down, if you're looking for a user knife, stay the hell away. This will not provide it. If you're looking for a fondling knife, something just to play with and have fun, and, you know, admire the gag design and mechanic on here, maybe this is worth going for. But honestly, with all the issues that it has, in terms of overall fit and finish and quality, like those screws and the amount of slop needed to get it to deploy properly due to how strong and stout those springs are, I think you could probably find something a little bit less dangerous and a little bit higher quality, even at this price point, which is about 15 bucks. Nevertheless, if you're wanting to experience this mechanism, this is a way to go. The smaller versions of this knife, I know, will not deploy at all whenever, or will not deploy at all using the intended mechanism. And I'm sure the SR Columbias probably have that issue too, due to it being a smaller design with equally stout of a spring. But who knows? Again, this is the larger version. They do make a smaller version of this exact same knife. Overall, though, I would definitely stay away. It's not a super awesome knife. And the reason I'm reviewing it, by the way, is because I feel like a lot of reviewers kind of lose sight of the purpose of a review. And what I mean by that, I'm not trying to put anyone down, but I've seen a lot of reviewers on video talk about how they won't review a knife that doesn't excite them, and that they don't like, that they don't enjoy. I find that logic to be highly flawed. And the reason why is because people look up reviews, for the most part, to figure out whether or not they should buy the knife. And if you have a lot of negative things to say about the knife, in my opinion, that means the video needs to be made even more than if you have a lot of positives. Because if someone buys a knife blindly, or a product of any kind blindly, and it turns out to be awesome, then hey, they're happy with it. The review just let them know about it, but if they couldn't find a review on it and it was a good product, they're still happy with it when they get it. If, you know, a bunch of reviewers own the product and didn't review it because they didn't like it, or they thought it was a piece of junk, and never put their opinions out there, and then that unknowing buyer goes out and buys it because there was no information to work off of, now they got screwed over and they have a very unsatisfactory product because no one would bother to take the time out of their day to review the product itself. And again, I'm not attacking anybody, I'm not going to say any names. A lot of reviewers have this issue, but I feel like it's an issue that shouldn't exist in the first place. You know, I feel like if you don't like a product, or there's a lot of negative things to say about a product, that warrants the review far more than if you do like it. And I'm not saying go out and buy buy something you know you're gonna hate, because I bought this hoping to like it. But if you do buy something and you end up not liking it, it's still worth taking the time to do the review on. Anyhow, small rant at the end there. That is the Jinjunlang. What model is this thing again? Didn't show you guys. JL-16011A. Okay, this is the white version, the satin version. They also make it in an all black version, and they're gonna make it in smaller versions. If you absolutely want this knife, you can find it on Amazon and eBay and various other sources for under 15 bucks. But honestly, if you're taking my opinion, it's really not worth purchasing. So that's been my review. Hope you guys have enjoyed. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, peace and take care.